Cigarette smoke contains over 7,000 chemicals, and nearly 70 of them are known to cause cancer. But it's not just what's in the smoke, it's what it does in the body that matters. Let's talk about what's actually inside a cigarette, and more importantly, what's inside the smoke that's inhaled. A cigarette is more than dried tobacco leaves, it's a chemical factory. When you burn one, you're not just lighting tobacco, you're setting off a series of complex chemical reactions that release thousands of compounds. Of the more than 7,000 chemicals in cigarette smoke, at least 250 are known to be harmful, and 69 are confirmed carcinogens. These include polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, tobacco-specific nitrosamines, TSNAs, benzene, formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, arsenic, and heavy metals like cadmium and lead. These chemicals exist in both the gas and the particulate phases of smoke. For example, carbon monoxide is a gas that reduces oxygen carrying capacity in the blood. In contrast, substances like benzo(A)-pyrene, an established carcinogen, are part of the tar or particulate matter. Nicotine is the star player, but it's not the direct cause of most smoking-related disease. Nicotine is what keeps people hooked. The real damage comes from the toxic byproducts created during combustion. One critical concept is bioavailability. When smoke is inhaled, chemicals are absorbed through the lungs into the bloodstream, where they're rapidly distributed throughout the body. Some compounds reach the brain in seconds. Once inside the body, many chemicals are metabolized into even more reactive substances. These metabolites can bind to DNA, damage cells, trigger inflammation, and interfere with normal repair mechanisms. That brings us to biomarkers, a growing area of research. Biomarkers help measure a person's exposure to cigarette smoke, the extent of biological harm, or both. So let's start with biomarkers of exposure. These are substances in blood, urine, or saliva that show whether someone has been exposed to tobacco smoke. One of the most common is cotinine, a metabolite of nicotine. It has a longer half-life than nicotine and is often used to detect recent smoking or second-hand smoke exposure. Another example is NNAL, a metabolite of potent tobacco-specific nitrosamine, NNK. NNAL levels indicate exposure to a known carcinogen and are used to assess cancer risk. Now, if we look at biomarkers of effect, on the other hand, recent biological changes or damage caused by smoking, for example, DNA adducts, where carcinogenic compounds bind directly to DNA, are considered early signs of potential cancer development. We also have markers of oxidative stress, such as 8-oxo-DG in urine, and markers of inflammation like elevated CRP or interleukin-6. These can indicate a pro-inflammatory state linked to cardiovascular and other chronic diseases. So why do these biomarkers matter for clinical care? Well, firstly, they help us understand individual risk. Two people who smoke the same number of cigarettes can have very different biomarker profiles and potentially different disease outcomes based on genetics, metabolism, and co-exposures. Second, they can support behavioral change. Showing patients objective measures of their smoke exposure like elevated NNAL or cotinine can sometimes be more persuasive than symptoms or statistics. Third, in research and public health, biomarkers help us evaluate tobacco products. For example, some newer products claim to reduce harm by lowering specific toxicants. But unless that translates to lower biomarkers of exposure and harm in real people, these claims are meaningless. Here's something else to consider. Not all tobacco smoke exposure comes from active smoking. Second-hand smoke and even third-hand exposure, residual chemicals left on surfaces, can lead to measurable biomarkers in non-smokers, including children. And remember, the complexity of cigarette smoke means that focusing on one or two toxicants is not enough. Reducing levels of one chemical may increase others or change combustion dynamics in unexpected ways. Take acetaldehyde. It's a known respiratory irritant and carcinogen, and it's one of the most abundant chemicals in cigarette smoke. It also plays a role in addiction by enhancing the reward effects of nicotine in the brain. Another example is acrolein, a byproduct of glycerol and sugar combustion. It damages the lungs' defense mechanisms and contributes to inflammation and oxidative stress. This interconnected web of chemicals, their interactions, and their biological effects makes the case clear. There is no safe way to smoke a cigarette. You cannot filter out enough, you cannot burn it more cleanly, you cannot escape the systemic impact. So what does this mean for you as a health professional? First, it reinforces that all cigarettes are harmful, regardless of design, flavor, or brand. Second, it opens the door to using biomarker testing like cotinine levels to detect covert exposure, especially in high-risk populations like pregnant women or children. Third, it challenges us to be skeptical of so-called reduced-risk products. If the chemical profile changes but the disease risk does not fall, what's really improved? And finally, it highlights the urgency of supporting smoking cessation. The longer the exposure, the greater the cumulative burden on DNA, blood vessels, lungs, and, in fact, every organ system. Understanding the chemistry behind cigarette smoke isn't just an academic exercise, it's a tool, a way to explain risk, a way to personalize care, and a way to advocate for policies that protect people from these invisible toxins. In our next episode in this smoking series, Smoking and Cancer, Mechanisms and Risks. That's all for today, folks. My name is Dr. Ferghal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.